Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in this Preaching Advent series. I'm Reverend Jim Keat, the Director of Online Innovation here at Convergence, and for this conversation I'm joined by Reverend Molly Baskette, the lead pastor at First Church Berkeley, UCC. She's also the author of a half dozen books, at least that's how many I counted on your website, Molly. And the latest one, coming out November 2022, is called Begin When Your World is Ending, a spiritual field guide to joy despite everything. Look at that. You've got an actual copy.
Product placement. Yes.
Okay, we're going to talk about Advent in a minute, but let's start with your book, because when I read the title and the subtitle, A Spiritual Field Guide to Finding to Joy Despite Everything, that to me, my Advent radar went off, not just because hope, peace, joy, love is the whole Advent thing.
Right.
What is this book? And, you know, it's coming out right before the Advent season. How might a preacher even use this book as part of Advent for their life, for their congregation? Give us the pitch.
Thanks for setting me up like that, Jim. It's a book, I like to call it disaster theology, progressive disaster theology, because when you're human, really hard things happen to us in life. And when we're at that low point, how do we get through? Which God do we grasp for? How do we find the resources? How do we call in the faith and the people that are going to help us find our way and not stay in the dark night of the soul? So Advent is that time of waiting and darkness. And we think of it as a really auspicious, happy time because we know what we're looking forward to is good. But in the reality of life, in the reality of a high-risk pregnancy, which Mary's was in many ways.
Yep.
We don't know that everything's going to turn out all right. So we need someone to have faith for us when we can't have it for ourselves. And that's what my attempt at this book is. It's me going through a cancer journey. It's me telling stories of people I've walked with through some really hard things and their own resiliency, their own resurrection. I describe it as post-traumatic resiliency, but also mid-traumatic joy. You know, how can we have joy when we're going through the hard thing? Because as we've seen from the last few years, it's really one thing after another. Like we hardly ever get to a place of equilibrium, you know, if you will, metaphorically, that's sort of like Christmas morning exhale when all is well and right with the world. Like it's not going to happen. So how do we grasp Christmas in the midst of Advent? How do we grasp joy in the midst of trauma? How do we look for light in the midst of the darkness and the fear? Darkness not being bad, darkness just being not knowing, not being sure.
Yeah. And you said there's like a Christmas special in the book as well.
So I just finished recording the audiobook yesterday. Like reading the whole thing out loud in 4 days was an experience. And I realized like how many times I said, and then I sobbed. There was a lot of sobbing, including right before Christmas Eve, 2010. I was about to almost done with my chemo, my long chemo protocol, which was its own kind of Advent experience. You know, frail, skinny, bald, being wheeled across the street from the ER to an ICU room where I was, you know, quarantined for a few days before Christmas. But then the triumphant moment when I got to go home for Christmas Eve, masked before we understood really what masking was, in my sanctuary in Somerville, Massachusetts, as a pew sitter, not as the leader, just the recipient of the tenderness of Christmas Eve with that newborn baby up on the chancel. So there it is.
I love it. Well, I'm looking forward to reading it myself. I hope everyone watching this is as well.
Thank you.
Look it up wherever you find books. How to Begin When Your World is Ending, coming out November 2022. And that was already a good little lead into some Advent chit chat. So let's talk about Advent specifically. From your point of view, experience, understanding, what is Advent and why is it important for the church?
Yes. Advent, it's so many things. And I constantly have this tussle in myself. You know, when I was first ordained, I thought of myself as a very orthodox, progressive Christian. You know, no Christmas hymns before Christmas Eve. You know, like we got to keep our pointy elbows. We got to keep Christmas at bay. We're not going to give into culture. We're going to create our own thing. We're going to be counterculture. We're going to hold back. We're going to defer gratification, right? And there's a part of me that's still there. In fact, last year we did a 7-week Advent at my church, which is an even older tradition than 4-week Advent. Some people really pushed back. They wanted the hygge, they wanted the coziness. They didn't want to wait at all. And they also wanted what they had become used to, which is 4-week Advent, that sort of build up. I think we need both. I think the church is there to discomfort us strategically and also to comfort us strategically, and to do both at the same time. So I think Advent can do both. It's one of, particularly for low church, I'm UCC. For low church churches, it's one of the few really ritualized times of year when we, like, our bodies get it. There are things for our bodies to do that intuitively make sense. It's not just words. It's lighting the candle. It's opening the door on the Advent calendar. It's Advent craft workshops. It's the hanging of the greens. All these like lovely rituals that build and build something and do it intergenerationally. I also think, as fewer people go to church or more people are watching online, Advent is really an opportunity for parents, for anyone raising kids, for people living multi-generationally to claim church in their home, to claim those traditions in their home.
Yeah.
My last book was called Bless This Mess. It's a Christian parenting book that tries to give the role of being chief spiritual teacher back to parents, because parents are very anxious about that. They're like, I don't know the Bible. I don't know how to articulate my faith. But Advent is a very easy in for people raising children. There's lots of good resources out there. I do an alternative Advent calendar every year. I email it out for free. Folks are welcome to subscribe. That just really sets it back in the home. And really, like, Advent has the best theology, right? It's God re-entering the world. I like to say God with skin on, from a little story I tell. It's a God you can see and touch and taste and smell and feel and hygge and hug.
Yeah.
It's God. It's God coming in the midst of frailty as a frail person themselves. Jesus frail, and owning our whole experience. It just is it's a theology we get much more intuitively, I think, than Holy Week theology, which is much more complex.
Yeah. I love that. I love the nature in which families can experience it, partly because, families are already likely focused on this whole Christmas whatnot anyway. So this just adds more significance and ritual and meaning to that.
Slows our roll.
Yeah. But the on-ramp is there. I mean, it's like, light these candles once each week, do an Advent calendar. There's simple things you can do
every day.
Yeah. That's really, we did our first Advent calendar last year. This was when we just had one kid. He was like a year. Now there's two of them. It's a flannel graph Advent calendar that my mom made before I was born, that I grew up putting together. So you put the whole nativity there and everything. And as I grew up, we began turning it into an interesting depiction where, like, the angels are flying baby Jesus in and the sheep are stacked up or something. My wife insisted on doing the traditional nativity for our son at least once. But I love that family experience that Advent provides. And how can pastors facilitate that, encourage that, empower that? That's really rich.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can iterate, right? Like, you have this flannel Advent calendar that is, like, passed down to the generations, but is fresh every year. And as your kids get older, like, this is going to be an anchor for them. Like, this is something they're going to look forward to. And it's also going to provide them with that grounding, like, kids need that structure, that swaddle, that ritual, that repetition to feel safe and grounded. Like, tradition is so important, actually, ritual and tradition, to metabolizing trauma. There's a lot of research about that now. So.
And just the ability for all ages, families of all ages, to grasp the theology. I think, Lent, Easter, we do the work of the church to invite people to participate in that. But I mean, it's a bit easier to be skeptical about resurrection than it is to be about a baby being born.
I know,
experienced a baby being born, or pregnancy and birth and life, and we can all. We all did that at least once. We got born, so
and we all get intuitively that, like, looking at this fragile new life, this newborn contains multitudes, that anything is possible for this child. Like, we feel it. We don't have to think it. We just feel it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the fourth week of Advent brings us
Yes.
to Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. That's the gospel text for Advent 4. What's going on in this particular passage, and how would you recommend that a preacher approached this text?
Okay. So this is where Joseph and Mary are betrothed, but not yet married. Joseph discovers that she is with child. More on that in a sec. He resolves to put her quietly away. Actually, the text says secretly away, which does not make him the hero that he sounds like, like he's getting off scot-free, but what's going to happen to Mary here? Until the angel comes to him in a dream and says, don't worry, don't fear. Mary's pregnant by the Holy Spirit. Take the child as your own. His name will be Jesus. All will be well. And then he follows through. He does what he's told. Interesting last verse is, he does not have sexual relations with her until she delivers her child, which also affirms that, Mary was sexually active for the rest of her marriage. So how I learned something new. So first thing, all of these stories are so familiar. They're really hard for preachers, particularly veteran preachers who've preached, 25 or 30 Christmas Eves, to get inside of, like, what's the new angle? Probably these resources are familiar to everyone watching already, but I love to read things in different translations. There's a couple really new, wonderful translations or approaches in the last couple of years. One is the Inclusive Bible, which really pulls apart text, particularly in regard to gender. One is, I'm going to forget, First Nations version, which came out about a year and a half ago and immediately sold out. It's an Indigenous translation. And one is, have it right here, Dr. Will Gaffney's A Women's Lectionary for the Church. And she does talk about this text. And one thing I learned from her that was fascinating when I reread it today is that the word child does not actually appear in verses 18 and 20. There's an ellipsis. The translators supply it, but it's not there. So the real translation is, Mary was found, Mary was found in womb having blank, question mark. It's like Mad Libs, which I think is fascinating. It's like, there's this mystery that is growing in Mary, and we don't know what it is yet. It could be anyone. It could be anything. It also, I think, has, for people in this really fraught, polarized political moment where, we've been arguing about reproductive rights and abortion access for 8 months to 50 years. It has big implications for that. All of this, who's going to care for this, whatever it is, what's Joseph's role? What's going to happen to Mary, however she came to be pregnant? And I know that's a complex thing to think about preaching the Sunday before Christmas. And yet we all need guidance, especially in the progressive church, about how to claim the mystery of what happens when the next generation is growing within us. How do we think about that? Whose life matters? This is such a great text for exploring a whole ethic of life, I would say, and bodily autonomy, and the mystery of when life begins and what is actually happening here. So that's what I'm noodling on right now.
All that for the fourth Sunday of Advent. Good luck, preachers.
Yeah. Well, and one very elegant way I thought, and I might do this myself, but feel free to steal it, is if you're lucky enough to have a very pregnant person in your church on the fourth Sunday of Advent, or a newborn baby, because I always want to carry around a newborn baby on Christmas Eve, but they're usually like, their parents are home sweating it out, trying to get them to sleep. Yeah. But Sunday morning before, just carry around that baby and let walk around with that pregnant person and let it preach visually, just that. Yeah. The hope, the promise, the wonder, the fear, the risk of birth, the possibility, while you add just a few words. Yeah, behind the experience.
Or maybe you're the very pregnant preacher, not you in particular, but whoever
right. I've been that very pregnant preacher at Christmas.
Yeah, you've been that. Yeah.
yeah.
That's the ultimate, end of Advent leaning into Christmas sermon right there. And just
exactly.
like, yep, week 38, 39, we're all waiting here. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I love that so much. I also love the resources you lifted up, the Inclusive Bible, and then Dr. Gaffney's lectionary series that she's developing. Both incredible resources, especially, like you said, for preachers who have dozens of Advents under their belt. That often, I think, can be one of the biggest challenges, where these seasons feel so repetitious. Okay, we all know the story. How do you even take a look at it with a fresh breath of air for the world around us? So, I mean, those two resources are probably helpful. What else would you recommend just on that approach in general? When preachers have these repetitive rhythms of our church life, and they're trying to not just copy and paste what they did a year or two ago, how do you kind of orient yourself to even engage that in a fresh way for you, the preacher, and for the congregation you're serving?
Absolutely. So two things come to mind. One is that, stories preach really well. And so I start thinking really early. I start not thinking, but like just noticing the worlds, where are the Advent stories? Where's the Christmas story? There's a reason Dickens is so popular. There's a reason sort of Tudor Christmas is like so popular, because it has, there's a lot of sentimentality about it that's based in stories. It's based in this kind of reversal from like poverty to wealth, from rupture to repair, from hatred to love. And so I start to look for those stories that can accompany the nativity story or the Advent story. But I also I don't, because our world is not a world of happy endings always, and because the church is called to discomfort, I look for that place where I can kind of name or create the rupture too. Like we're not here just to sort of wrap everything in tissue paper flowers, and just because that's not how reality is. So I almost never preach a sermon in which I don't like sort of bring the text to the brink, in which I don't create trouble or like notice the trouble that's there already, like kind of throwing Joseph under the bus, for example. Like the Bible's full of humans, not heroes, So what's the anti-hero here? Or I don't want to say anti-hero. What's, Joseph's on a learning curve. Mary herself, like we love to, make Mary, beatify Mary, and can we struggle with her a little bit? So what's the tension we can raise? And that's always a fun place.
The text. I like that.
And that's always a fun place to start. And with our own humanity as well.
Exactly, because that always brings the fresh perspective right there, because the humanity around us is constantly shifting and changing, whether it's our own skin or the people we're encountering in our community and the world at large that's changing. That's like, this will be the first Advent Christmas season with this war in Ukraine. That's an ongoing thing. And there's always new humanities that we're encountering that we can, make that Venn diagram with the text and see what new color emerges as a result.
Exactly. And, everything old is new. We love to, preachers love to, preachers of it, maybe a different generation, love to tell the Christmas story from 1917, World War I, where the German and Allied soldier, German and I guess that's a different war, closed up the space in no man's land and found Christmas together, whether that was actually historically true or not. We're living through such terrifying times, like those stories are our stories now. We could be like, not to be too dark, but like we could be on the brink of nuclear war. Like we don't know. With Putin kind of has cornered himself, So that the discomfort's there. How do we bring that in strategically, and then pull back the camera to provide the wider perspective that God is with us? I mean, that's literally God's name in Advent. God is with us. How do we name that and make it real for people so that we can keep going?
Well, bring on Advent, because I think you just gave us at least 2 sermons out of all of this, if not 3. So
you only need one. Please, preachers, please only preach one. We've all done that.
True. Try
and
not
now for my second sermon, the day of the morning.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, Molly, thank you for this time. Thank you for just such a rich conversation, all your wisdom and ideas and insight. Always
Great to see
incredible.
you.
Thanks for all your books. Everyone out
You
there,
bet.
go read
You
them
bet.
all. And there'll be more of these videos to keep watching. And we'll talk more about Advent in the next one. Talk to you
Great to
soon.
see you, Jim. Take care.